All right, welcome everybody. So again, if you get a chance to rename yourself in your little rectangle, 3 dots at the top right, choose rename and add your role here. Are you a parent? Are you a practitioner? If you're a parent to a child who had a stroke or brain injury, let us know that as well. And I'm gonna begin by introducing myself, and then I will, oops, sorry. We've got to mute somebody. Okay. Huh. Okay, I coordinate these events and I'm gonna show you a few slides to introduce the series, and then I will introduce our first speaker for today. I'm Mara Yale. I'm mom to 2 children who are 12 and 15. My younger child had a stroke at birth that was diagnosed after seizures presented at 2 days of age. They're now thriving. Sometimes in this series, you hear us talk about stroke thrivers, not just stroke survivors. So the vision of this series is really to promote information and education that supports all children to thrive after early brain injury. And I'll share. Okay, so the theme today is called Play to Thrive. And we are a group of parents that form the Pediatric Stroke Advisory Council, and we partner with others around the Boston area and internationally. And we are really, as I said, in the business of helping improve lives of children by education. Stroke and brain injury, as you know, can affect the whole lifespan. And it doesn't matter when you have a brain injury, it's going to affect potentially many different aspects of your life. And so getting early care and treatment, as well as ideas for how to support development, are really essential. In these series, we want to make clear that this is for educational purposes, informational purposes only. If you need medical attention, we urge you to go to your nearest provider. And just a little bit of history about what we've done on this education series. We started in 2019 with in-person events, 2 of them at Mass General Hospital. And we haven't been able to do in-person events for quite a while because of COVID. So we went online in the fall of 2020. And this is now the 19th virtual event that we will have run in the last 3 years. We're very proud of all of them, and they're on YouTube. So you can join our mailing list, contribute, and I'll put all these links in the chat during the talks, and see also on Facebook our activity. And we're super excited to be coming back in person for those of you who are in the Boston area or New England who can come to Boston a week from tomorrow. So if you're able to come, we're meeting at Spalding, and there're going to be a whole set of stations where there'll be fun activities for kids to do, including both Jumpstart, Physical Therapy, and Boston Ability Center are 2 of the station masters. So we're super excited for that. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to introduce Gretchen Murphy, who's my co-chair of the Parent Advisory Council.
Thanks, Mara. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gretchen Murphy. I'm the mother to Owen Murphy, who is a 7-year-old, recently turned 7, stroke thriver. So this series is very interesting and near and dear to my heart because the next speaker you'll be hearing from is Anna Pietal, who is Owen's physical therapist. ever since he graduated from early intervention at age 3, so 4 years ago. We have seen her on a weekly basis to help Owen. Owen has right hemiplegia as a result of a stroke at birth. He wears a brace on that leg. And we've been working with Anna over this time period to strengthen and optimize the use of that leg so that he can run and play and walk and climb stairs along with his friends. So one of the unique challenges that happened with us, as happened with everybody on this call, was COVID. So with COVID, everything shut down, and we needed to figure out how to continue to engage and promote his physical therapy in a remote environment. So Anna and I were able to successfully partner, and through leveraging Zoom and lots of text messages an hour before sessions to say, bring a deck of playing cards, bring, some of Owen's favorite toys, set up a ladder, set up a Bosu ball. And we were able to continue his therapy remotely and make it fun. So a lot of what we'll be focused on today is how we did it. Anna's going to probably share the story of how she was successful with Owen, but Owen enjoyed every minute of it. One of the games that was played with the playing card, he had to flip one over, tell her what number, it was number 7, and he had to do 7 burpees. So it made it really fun. So he was really excited to turn it over and then prove to her over Zoom that he could do it. So instilled a lot of confidence in him as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce Anna Pietal, who's been a savior to my son, a physical therapist from Jumpstart that we meet with on a regular basis. So take it away, Anna, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Gretchen. I'm going to share my screen first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on. So first of all, thank you for having me on this talk. I'm really excited to share with you some ideas of how to bring your therapeutic play to home. My name is Anna Pietal, as Gretchen said. I am a doctor of physical therapy from Jumpstart Physical Therapy in Norwood, Massachusetts. And if you're in the Boston area and looking for a PT, we have locations in Norwood, Natick, and Newton. So today in my talk to you, I'm going to talk a little bit about Owen, who Gretchen introduced already, and then talk a little bit about telehealth and how COVID led to creativity, how to think like a PT, which is the main event of today, to kind of give you ideas on how I think about things and how to incorporate that into home. And then I'll wrap up and pass it over to Mackenzie. So first, meet Owen. Owen, as Gretchen said, is a 7-year-old male in Massachusetts. He loves cars and trucks. He loves Pokemon, Beyblades, toys, bowling, and activities he participates in outside of PT are soccer, swimming, and skiing, along with basketball, hiking, and just overall being active. So a little bit about Owen and PT. And actually, before I go into Owen specifically, PT in general, for those of you who are a little confused about what the difference is between PT and OT, I'll explain PT myself, and then Mackenzie will explain her role as an OT. But PT, we focus more on gross motor skills and global strength. In the pediatric population, there's a little bit more crossover between OT and PT, versus in the adult population, PTs will tend to focus more on lower body, whereas OTs will tend to focus on upper body. However, there is crossover, but mainly gross motor skills for PT and strength coordination, stuff like that. So for Owen, our impairments that we're working with are his right leg, as Gretchen said. He wears an AFO on that leg, which is an ankle foot orthoses, a brace that goes from his foot to his knee, which helps him to keep his toes up so he's not dragging his foot when he walks. And we're working on his coordination in general. And then activities that we're working on specifically, we do stretching, we do strengthening, we do motor control activities and motor planning activities. And for those of you who don't know the difference between those two medical jargon terms, motor control is the process of initiating, directing, and grading purposeful movement. And motor planning is a skill that allows us to remember and perform steps to make movement happen. So we do this subconsciously with all activities. Our target outcomes with Owen in PT are to decrease his brace use, to improve his walking pattern, and to keep up with his peers overall. So we'll come back to Owen throughout the whole presentation today and kind of use his case as an example of how to bring play into home or therapeutic play into home. So lastly in this section is just a reminder on how to communicate with your therapist or ideas that will make communication easier. And that includes goals, participation, relationship, carryover, and team approach. So for goals, in PT and all medical professionals will constantly be reevaluating your child, but usually not every session, but every 10 sessions or so. So in those reevaluations is when we'll typically ask the parent or the guardian, hey, what goals do you want to work on going forward? However, that does not mean that this is the only time for you to bring up goals in sessions. It's very helpful to share goals whenever you think about them. And it kind of goes along with the team approach. If another team member, your OT, or even your gym teacher, or maybe a parent, a friend's parent notices, oh, hey, your kid is having trouble doing this the way that this other child is. Bring those things to our attention, and that way we can work on those as goals in the future sessions. Very helpful. Participation in sessions, as your child is an infant, obviously you're going to be a little bit more involved in sessions in the clinic, but when do you know when to stop coming to sessions or to be less present in sessions? And that's something that you'll have to work out with your kid and with your therapist. But as a kid is getting older, typically it's nice for them to have some independence with their work that they're doing in the clinic. But you do want to make sure to check in after sessions to make sure we're all on the same page and go over what we worked on in the session. And then relationship is super important between therapist and parent and therapist and patient. And if you're not vibing with your therapist, it's okay to try someone else. Make sure that your child is happy and enjoying themselves and having fun. Otherwise, they're going to dread all of these developmental skills and activities. And then lastly is the carryover. And it's very important to have carryover at home, doing the same activities that you do in the clinic at home, because working on these things for 1 hour a week is great, but the more that you work on them, the more repetition you're getting, the better off your kid will be, and the more that they will thrive. And that's what we'll talk about in bringing these activities to home, things that you can work on. So next up is a brief talk about telehealth and how COVID affected PT and services in general. So I included this video of Owen because Gretchen had told you before that we were creative with our sessions. And so here's a little video of us doing telehealth together. A short and sweet video, but it shows that you can have success with telehealth. Obviously, some kids it's a little bit harder, especially using a screen, and especially in the times when we were all just on our screens all day long, hard to do PT through a screen as well. But there are many pros to telehealth, one being access from remote locations. So you can always reach out to medical professionals that aren't within your area and have access to larger areas of medical professionals. Or you can also eliminate some of that travel time in between sessions. For those of you with kids that are parents or guardians of these kids with strokes or brain injuries, we realize that you're going back and forth to visits all the time. So if you feel like you're constantly in the car, telehealth is definitely a good alternative to in-session therapy. And then one other really good pro to telehealth that I realized during COVID is the benefit to seeing a child in their environment, because sometimes your child will come into the clinic and they don't want to participate at all. They're having trouble doing really any activity. And so in the clinic, we don't know, is this their baseline? What's going on here? So for example, I had a kiddo with a brain tumor, and over COVID, we transitioned from in-clinic to telehealth visits. And I got to see him navigate his home environment, including going up and down stairs, walking in between rooms, which is something that I didn't see in the clinic. So it's really helpful. I think everyone could benefit from at least one telehealth visit. That way your therapist can see what they look like in an environment they're comfortable in. But that being said, I think the gold standard is in clinic sessions where we can get our hands on your kid and see a little bit deeper into what the impairments are that may be causing their difficult activities. Oopsie. Sorry. All right, and now for the main event is thinking like a PT. So me helping you to think about the way your child may be having difficulty with activity and helping you transfer that to home in a therapeutic way. So I made these steps to thrive. Step number 1 is finding a difficult activity. So this could be something that you bring to your therapist, someone that noticed, maybe the gym teacher said, hey, they're having trouble kicking with both feet. They only like to kick with one foot in gym class, whatever it may be. What activity is hard for your kid? The next step is naming the impairment. So naming what might be causing the difficulty in that activity. Is it their balance? Is it their range of motion? Is it their strength, motor planning like we talked about? What is causing that difficulty? Step number 3 is breaking it down. Think about what components you want to address to find or to help you make that activity easier. And it can be related to or not related to the original activity, or maybe breaking down that activity into steps. And then step 4 is making it fun and practicing. So getting creative. Here's a couple ways to make it fun. Number 1, make it a game. What is your kid interested in? For Owen, like I said, he loves bowling. For the past 6 months at least, every time he comes in, he says, can we bowl? So how do I make that fun and therapeutic? We can put him into a half kneel. We can change his position, maybe have him stand on something unstable. That way he's working his balance. Or maybe it's adding in a heavy ball. That way he's using more muscles to lift the ball up before he rolls it. In the video that you saw with the telehealth, we were doing a scavenger hunt. So we hid toys around the room, and then we're doing animal walks to those toys. Whatever makes your kid motivated, use that thing and then make it therapeutic. Number 2, obstacle courses are really awesome, especially in the summertime when maybe your kid isn't receiving school services from PT like they typically would. You can go outside, make an obstacle course out of chalk. Kids really like this one. They like helping you draw the obstacles, maybe make a hopscotch, balance beam, whatever it is, make it fun, go outside. Nature is your playground. Which leads me to number 3, which is go outside. Walking through the woods, hiking, stepping over roots. These are all good things to help your kid get stronger and navigate these unstable surfaces. Touching the ground, rolling on the ground, going up and down hills, all things that are really good for strengthening your kiddo. Number 4 is competitions. Levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe you're throwing a ball to a target. If you throw the ball to the target right next to you and you get it in, that's level 1, you completed it. Have the kids step back to level 2 and see if they can get all the way to level 5 where they're standing really far away. Some kids are very motivated by this, some people not. Most kids I've found are motivated by races too. So whether it's running or riding on a scooter, maybe it's a bear crawl, making a race and have them try to beat you. And then the last one is rewards. You'll be hard pressed to find a kid that won't do an activity for a lollipop or a sticker, or maybe it's choosing the next activity. Whatever reward motivates them, again, choose that and go with that. All right, so I have a few examples of that step-by-step steps to thrive that I was talking about and bringing Owen back into the mix. So this one Our difficult activity is walking. So he has that right toe in when he's walking. So something that could be contributing to that is limited hip rotation, specifically external rotation. Then we break it down. Let's see what we can do to increase that hip rotation. And so that would be a butterfly stretch. And then to make it fun, we're adding in soccer ball kicks. So using that range of motion that we stretched to actively move his leg through that range of motion in a fun way. So here's a couple pictures. On the left, you see Owen. And if you can tell, his right knee is a little bit higher than his left knee in this position. And this is his butterfly stretch. And that's showing you that his right hip is a little bit tighter. So on the right picture, we're working on our soccer ball kicks. In this picture, he's holding onto a foam roller because he's a little bit unsteady on that one foot. And we wanted to focus on the range of motion. So this is a regression of just a standing soccer ball kick because I'm helping to facilitate his movement here. And then once he gets good at that, we can work on kicking the ball back and forth together. Make it a little bit more fun, maybe kicking it to a target. And then another example, maybe your kid has frequent falls. Maybe that impairment is that they just have difficulty balancing. Maybe it's the strength in their legs, their ankles, their knees, their hips that makes balancing difficult. So what can we do to practice that? Balance on different surfaces, whether this be inside on a pillow or a cushion, hardwood floor versus rug, or maybe going outside onto grass, changing the balance surface, and then making it fun. We can make an obstacle course like I was talking about before. So here's a picture. Like I said before, Owen is super into Pokemon these days. So one day he brought Pokemon cards into the clinic. And what we did was made an obstacle course where he had to walk on these unstable surfaces, pick up a beanbag and throw it to the Pokemon cards that were on the ground. And he kept going until he caught all the Pokemon by hitting them with the beanbags. So this was super fun for him. He just wanted to do all day long, but it included something that he liked, the Pokemon cards, with something that I wanted to work on, the balance. So when do we know when to progress or regress? So a couple things that you can look at are behavior, success, and movement quality, and knowing or using those things to help you gauge whether it's easy for your child, hard for your child, or just right. So taking an example of throwing a ball, behavior-wise, if you ask your child to throw and catch a ball with you, do they avoid it? Do they say this is way too hard or this is way too easy? Watch their behavior and see if it's something that they're avoiding because it's too hard, or if it's just way too easy and they're too successful, which is the next one, success. Does the activity seem too easy or does it seem too hard? Can your child talk to you and carry out a full-on conversation when they're throwing this ball back and forth? Or if you're asking them to throw to a target, are they hitting that target 100% of the time? Or are they hitting it one time out of 10, let's say? 0 times, 1 time, 2 times out of 10, that is too hard for your kid and it's going to lead to frustration. So if your child is getting super frustrated, make that activity a little bit easier because we want them to be successful, but still challenged. You don't want it 100%, but you also don't want it 0%. And then lastly is their movement quality. Is one arm or leg easier or harder than the other? Are they symmetrical side to side? Is the movement choppy or fluid, slow or fast? So with the example of throwing a ball, do you have to walk them through the steps of point, step, throw when they're throwing overhand? Do they do it easily, smoothly? Look at the way they're moving, and that will give you a little indicator on whether it's too hard or too easy. And then I included here the stages of motor learning, just a chart for you to reference if you are interested. The stages of motor learning apply to all people with any new activity. So any new activity, you are in the cognitive stage where you need a lot of verbal cues, step-by-step sequencing of what's going on. Again, back to that throwing the ball or catching the ball example. With a kid who's learning to catch a ball, you tell them, look at the ball, set up your hands. Are your hands ready to catch? Grab the ball with 2 hands, pull it into your chest, whatever it may be, those cues to step-by-step how to catch a ball, that's a cognitive stage. The associative stage, they've done this task a few times, but they're still thinking about how to do it. So maybe that's them verbalizing the steps of, oh, yep, let me set my hands up, let me look at the ball, let me catch the ball, and then I'll throw it back to you. And then the autonomous stage is when you are an expert in an activity. This takes a lot of practice. It's usually more elite athletes, but you can use this chart to reference if your child is in the cognitive stage, if they're in the associative stage, and whether you can make that activity harder or easier. If they're in the cognitive stage, keep it at that level, let them figure it out a little bit more before progressing to the next thing. And then lastly, making it easier or harder. A couple things for you to think about are the position, the surface, and the number of steps or components to an activity. So the position, you can think about how much contact your child has with the floor, because the more contact they have, the more stable that they're going to be. So if they're sitting, are they sitting on the floor? That's a lot of contact. Are they sitting on a chair with their feet on the floor? Again, a lot of contact. Are they sitting on a chair with their feet dangling? Less contact. That's more strain on their body. It's going to make it harder. And then you can move to standing on one foot, kneeling, doing a tall kneel, half kneel, or any animal walker position like a bear or a crab walk. All great positions and ways to make things easier or harder. Surface, we've talked about this a couple times before. Hard surfaces, soft surfaces. Cushions in your house are squishier than the hardwood floor. Have them stand on a cushion if something on the floor is too easy. Or going outside, being on the grass is a little bit more bumpy, uneven versus on pavement. So changing the surface there is also a way to make things harder or easier. And then the number of steps or components to an activity. The one-step commands of catch or throw are going to be easier than maybe an obstacle course where you're adding a bunch of things together. So maybe it's throw and catch the ball 3 times and then bear walk to this destination, do a couple jumping jacks, do a couple burpees, and then roll your way back. So that amount of steps is obviously more motor planning that needs to happen, more sequencing, and it's going to make it a lot harder for your child to follow. So add more steps if you want to make it harder, decrease the number of steps if you want to make it easier. And then I think that is all I have. That is the end of my presentation. Thanks so much for listening to me. Here's another nice picture of Owen collapsed in his skiing position. But we'll do questions at the end. But if you want to contact me separately, I added my email and then the number and website of Jumpstart Physical Therapy, as well as our Instagram and our Facebook. Feel free to reach out at any time. I'd love to brainstorm things with you or just connect on your child and how to help them thrive. So our next speaker for today is Mackenzie, and I'll let her introduce herself, but let me stop sharing.
Thanks, Anna. Let me just share my screen real quick. All right, can everyone see that okay? Perfect. So my name is Mackenzie Ricker. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, and I work at the Boston Ability Center. I work at our Natick location in Massachusetts. We also have a location in Wellesley. And what I'm going to be going over is some ways to engage kids in play, and then more specifically, how to kind of set up or optimize your child's play to target some therapy goals, at least from an OT perspective. So just a quick bit of background information for those who aren't familiar. Occupational therapists work with individuals of all ages, all abilities, whether it be physical challenges, more social emotional challenges, and we target skills in different areas of what we call occupations. So when we think of occupation, probably the first thing that comes to mind is work, and that's definitely one of them. But really this can be anything from activities of daily living, like eating and dressing, to things like rest and sleep, education at all different levels, social participation. But what I'm going to be mainly talking about today is play, which we all know is really crucial for development in so many ways. And really, if we think about it, is a child's main occupation. So what I want to start with is some general ideas for how to really engage your child in play. Some general ideas. At Boston Ability Center, we run intensive therapy camp programs as well as a regular summer camp. And what's fun about that is kind of finding ways to help kids work towards their goals in ways that still feel like play. So that's not to say that there's not hard work involved, there definitely is, but it's tons of fun. And with summer right around the corner, I want to talk about some ways that you can really bring camp home. I think for a lot of kids, part of the joy of any camp is that it's novel, right? It's a change from the day-to-day of school. They get to do things that maybe they wouldn't normally do at home. And it's all about play. So I'm going to go through a few ways that you can kind of create that same atmosphere at home with things you probably have lying around the house while working on some goals simultaneously that we typically see for children who have experienced a stroke or brain injury. I'm going to go through some general ideas and then we'll focus more specifically on picking play-based activities that target more specific goals. So really the most important thing is making sure that activities are child-led. What we know about play is that really it's not true play if it's overly imposed, if it's overly structured, or really if it's just not bringing true joy or entertainment to the child. So some things that we see as this looks like play might not be true play if those conditions aren't met. So oftentimes what we do as OTs is allow a child to show us what's really intrinsically motivating to them. So they're picking out the toy or activity, and then we're thinking about ways that we can adapt that activity to kind of meet their needs while also challenging them. And I'll go into specifics of how we do that in a bit. And also sometimes I think people sometimes think about child-led in terms of young children, but it also becomes really super important for older children as well, because by that point, they're really starting to develop their unique interests. And it's those interests that are going to really kind of like fuel them to develop skills that they need in order to engage in those interests. So definitely important to kind of think about it across the lifespan. Second, we often like to think about using things in new ways. I'm sure you've all heard a child say at some point, there's nothing to do, or I'm bored, even if there's lots of things around. So novelty can really go a long way in kind of spicing things up and keeping a child's interest, which can in turn keep them motivated to do an activity that's also working on a particular skill. So, you know, some examples in these pictures, if you've got an old pool noodle lying around, maybe that becomes a lightsaber. So maybe you're practicing really using two hands to hold on to it. Maybe like Anna said, you're changing up, you know, standing on a couch cushion, so you're having to balance while you're using it. Maybe you have some plastic animals lying around and those become stamps for sugar cookie dough that your child helps to make by maybe using a rolling pin with two hands or helping to pour and scoop. In this picture on the right, maybe you've got some old t-shirts lying around and you can kind of cut them up and decorate them as capes with fabric markers to work on fine motor skills. So whatever it may be, kind of changing how you use something can really add an element of fun. And hopefully you can kind of see in some of these examples that it's fun, it's playful, but still there is an element of challenge to it and it is working on a variety of skills. But to the kids, it looks like play. Kind of going along with that, we like to think about things that kind of taking typical activities and changing one element, maybe changing lots of elements. So here I'm using the example of painting, but really this can apply to anything. We like to kind of think through each element and ways we can switch it out to make it exciting or to target a particular skill. So for example, if your child's no longer interested in sitting at a table and painting on paper, maybe you take shaving cream and stand in the shower and finger paint on the wall. Maybe you take chocolate pudding and use a paintbrush to paint on a doll to say they're muddy and then give them a bath in a bowl of shaving cream and water. Maybe you take a magnet wand and drag magnets through paint to kind of make designs. And if we think about the skills that each of these things involve, there's ways that we can really engage kids in these fun, playful activities while targeting things like grasp or tolerance for messy play for some of our friends who don't really like their hands getting dirty, or shoulder strengthening. If you're doing something on a vertical surface, you're having to keep your arm up and stable. So just by changing one small element, you can kind of make it exciting, but also then target a particular skill. Another important thing to remember is that truly almost anything can be made into a game in some way or another. Sometimes certain things that we would love kids to practice just honestly aren't particularly thrilling. So I can honestly say I've never seen a child super entertained by practicing things like zippers and buttons, but those are things that ultimately we practice at some point. So if we can kind of add an element like minute to win it, where you see how many times you can do something in 60 seconds, or beating a record or follow the leader, it can kind of quickly become an engaging game. So in this picture, this little girl was working on grasp and release with her affected arm during a CIMT program. And it turned out that cheese puffs were the exact right size to practice pinching. So we covered a shower cap and shaving cream, and her job was to see how many cheese balls she could pick up and stick to the cap in 60 seconds. So again, it looks like play, it's a lot of hard work. For practicing skills like dressing, we can put articles of clothing at one end of an obstacle course. So each time a child goes through, they have to add that article of clothing. You know, as kids get older, maybe they're working on something like writing or cutting. So maybe they're writing down the rules to the minute to win it challenges, or maybe they're writing down the steps to an obstacle course. Maybe they're cutting Play-Doh or cutting magazines to make a collage. Again, changing an element and kind of making it into a game to make it a bit more engaging. Allowing kids space to kind of experiment and invent can also be really motivating and fun. And it's also a really great opportunity to practice things like problem solving, frustration tolerance, and even some executive functioning skills for older kids, like planning and organizing their ideas to kind of make something come to fruition. So this picture on the right here of the boat, we can think about that in terms of things like trial and error to figure out what works best, using two hands to kind of rip the foil from the roll, mold it into the shape that we want, maybe using an affected hand to pick up pennies and place them in the boat, maybe using two hands to carry a bit of water, or for older kids, maybe they're writing out the materials that they need. We can, you know, I think if you look closely, I think there's a flag on there, so that probably involves some cutting, some coloring. So again, to a kid, this just looks like a fun experiment, and we're just posing it as, let's make a boat and see how many things we can float in it. But really, it's working on a lot of different skills at the same time. Another one I know kids and parents in general can all have different levels of affinity for is messy play. So things like shaving cream, sand, dirt, slime, that's a big one right now, water beads. It's not only great for kids who may have sensation impacted in their upper extremities, but can also be really motivating. So maybe we're hiding small things in the messy materials, or maybe for older kids, they're helping to make the slime and they're following written instructions and measuring and pouring with two hands. Those are all skills that are going to kind of later translate into things like cooking for improved independence. And if you have a child that's more hesitant to interact with these types of things, you know, it's a great opportunity to get out things like paintbrushes and scoops and, you know, just different things to kind of build their tolerance in a way that they're still exposed and engaging with these things, but kind of from a little bit of a distance to make them more comfortable, and still targeting things like fine motor skills to use all those different tools. Another idea is kind of adding a theme. So sometimes I find that an activity is just an activity and it goes by pretty quickly. But if you kind of string together a few things and get kids' imaginations going, it can really stretch out the activity. And the longer the activity goes, the more time your child might be practicing a particular skill. So if we take this example of the rocket ship here that the child is making at snack time, maybe we can have a child use their affected hand to pick up and place the food items where they go. Or maybe if it's an older child, they can help prep the items by cutting the cheese or slicing the apples. Whatever your child might be working on, if we can kind of tie it into a theme, we can maybe keep it going a little longer. And then it's not just cutting an apple, it's making a rocket ship. So making it a little bit more motivating. Anna talked about this, so I'll go really quickly through it, but I can't go without encouraging everyone to get outside. There's just so many natural opportunities to work on skills, whether it be balance. This kiddo in the picture with the slide is using 2 hands to pull up the slide. Digging in the dirt is a great opportunity to practice finger strengthening or using different tools. You know, drawing on a wall with chalk. And, you know, to kids, this all just looks like play. But again, if we're breaking down these activities, there's lots of different opportunities to practice different skills. And, you know, taking advantage of those outdoor spaces, playgrounds, toys that you can use in your driveway. Kids will show you what they're interested in pretty quickly outside, and you can kind of think through the ways that that's really building their skills in a natural way. And last, you know, OTs are big on kind of making things functional. So while play is in and of itself really functional for a child, there's also ways we can kind of maximize on that piece that are in turn gonna make things exciting and motivating. So in this picture, we've got 2 boys washing a car, and I included it because you'll notice the boy on the right is not using a hose, he's using a spray bottle. So he's got to use 2 hands. He's got a ton of hand and finger strengthening going on to squeeze that spray bottle. He's got to keep his arms up for quite a while, which is building his shoulder strength. And this is where, you know, I'll say that as parents, you guys know your kids best. So you likely know what your child's interests are and what their goals are, and what's going to be functional for them. So thinking about play that is meaningful to them. Maybe it's figuring out how to hold a video game controller. Maybe it's figuring out how to take a cookie sheet out of the oven with 2 hands, kind of whatever stage that they're at, really thinking about what is going to be motivating to them is important. So that kind of goes back to making sure it's child-led. All right. So now that we've kind of talked about some broad ideas for play, I wanted to go a bit more into some specifics for ways that we as OTs use play to target goals that we see commonly worked on for kids who have had a stroke or brain injury. Obviously, each child's going to be a little bit different in their strengths and challenges, and each child's going to be at a different point in the development of these skills. But these are just some general categories that we think about, and that hopefully you can, you know, as you're watching your child play, you can think about how each of these elements might be contributing to that activity. So we've got weight bearing, which is being able to put weight through both arms. We've got shoulder stability. We've got being able to bend and extend your elbow and your wrist. Pronation and supination refers to this motion of kind of turning your palm up towards the sky and then turning it down towards the ground. Hand and finger strength, bimanual skills, which is using 2 hands together, and then activities of daily living. So things like eating and dressing and brushing teeth, things that people have to do on a daily basis. And one thing that I want to mention is a lot of these skills kind of form a little bit of a continuum. So if any one of these things is really challenging, we can kind of think about bringing the level of challenge down. So we often think about starting proximally, meaning towards the center of our bodies. So things like core strength and having strong, stable shoulders, and then kind of moving distally, meaning towards, you know, our hands and fingers and wrist. In order to make really precise, stable movements with our hands and fingers, we have to have a strong core and stable shoulders and that sort of thing. So if something with hands and fingers is too challenging, maybe we're thinking about taking a step back and first thinking about ways to strengthen those other movements, like our core strength and our shoulder stability. And before I go into each of these, I also just want to kind of emphasize that you know, we certainly don't want kids to feel like they're in therapy all the time. And I know as parents, you guys don't want to feel like you are having to be the therapist for your child. So we want the kids to play and to enjoy these activities. So I've got some examples here just to kind of think through how you can target these skills, but you can really apply them to whatever is fun and meaningful for your child. So first is kind of ways to promote weight bearing. So to do this, there are ways we can take any play activity that a child's interested in and just slightly change their position to facilitate putting weight through an affected hand or arm. So for example, in this picture, this little girl's putting weight through an arm while using a dominant hand to do a craft. This little boy's putting weight through his arm while listening to a story. We can do things like animal walks to get from room to room, or yoga poses, side sitting and putting weight through an arm that way. Quadruped, which refers to being on all fours, kind of like you're crawling. So again, just kind of taking an activity and thinking about how we can switch up a position to get some weight put through that affected extremity. The next is promoting shoulder stability. In this case, we're looking at ways that we can take typical activities and just kind of change the setup. So instead of sitting at a table to do things, maybe we can move it to a vertical surface. So when you've got something up on a wall, you're having to get your wrist into a good position. You're having to keep your shoulder really stable. So in some of these pictures, you'll see, painting on a wall outside on paper or with chalk. For younger kids, you can have them using magnets on the refrigerator. We've got this shirt taped up to the wall that a child was using a sponge to fabric paint on. So just by kind of changing the positioning, it's still fun and it's still play, but we're just switching it up a little bit to target a specific skill. Another way can be kind of taping preferred items to a vertical surface. So that maybe the child is using their affected arm to reach and pull those things off. So, things like toy cars, Matchbox cars, dollhouse people, Connect Four pieces. We're just kind of changing how we're presenting those things to add in a little bit of challenge. Another thing we look at is, again, that motion to turn your palm up towards the sky and down towards the ground. And for many of the kids I've worked with, it's really that motion of turning the palm up that's most challenging. So we can make it into a game, like maybe put a sticker on this portion of the child's arm and they have to turn to find that sticker and see what it is. We can practice activities like scooping and pouring, whether that be, water or dried rice or beans, playing keep it up with a balloon with underhand strokes. Or even just getting that hand into kind of a neutral position, which is as if you're going in for a handshake. So you can see this little boy is working hard to kind of get that dot marker into an upright position. So things like turning your hand to squeeze a glue bottle, anything to get a little bit more of that motion is helpful. And then if we continue to move down the arm, next we're going to think about activities that strengthen the hands and fingers. So again, we want this to be child-led. So maybe just think about what types of toys your child is interested in that also offer some resistance. So is it pulling apart Legos? Is it digging in the dirt? Is it a craft that uses small things like pom-poms or Q-tips? For older kids, is it something like Jenga where they really have to keep their hand steady or kind of isolate a finger to poke a block out? For older kids who are working on things like writing or cutting, we can have them play restaurant and write down drink orders at dinner time, or again, writing out materials that they need for a craft project or a cooking project. Just ways to kind of incorporate play, but still be thinking about, those small movements of the hands and fingers. Another thing I'll talk about that in the next one. So we've talked a lot about activities for that can really apply to a child's affected upper extremity, but then we also want to think about ways that we can translate those skills to bimanual activities. So using both hands, whether your hands are doing the same thing or whether they're doing different things, but at the same time. So this little girl is working hard to kind of pinch that teacup with her affected hand, while then using her dominant hand to use a dropper to put some colored vinegar in baking soda in the cup. So we were having a little like fizzy tea party. We've got Spider-Man here doing some stirring. He's holding the bowl with one hand while the other is stirring. And again, I myself love to cook, so I'm a little biased, but I think cooking is a great activity for kids to kind of see the results of their efforts. And there's so many things that it involves. Using a rolling pin, stirring, opening containers, maybe using scissors to snip open a package. All those types of things are working on a lot of different skills. For younger kids, you can do some activities like using 2 hands to pop bubbles, or put together and pull apart Duplo blocks. And another really fun one is just kind of taking preferred items and wrapping them up. So whether that be foil or Play-Doh or wrapping paper, you know, using 2 hands to open it up and see what's inside can make it exciting. And then the last thing I'll talk about, which I, to be honest, often find to be kids' least favorite activity to practice, are activities of daily living. So things like dressing, using utensils, toileting. There's lots of ways that we can use these broad categories that I talked about before to make these things that are a little mundane a little bit more fun and playful. So for example, I think Zingo is a common game these days. If a child's working on cutting with a fork and knife, maybe we can practice cutting putty, and instead of using the picture to mark off what we have on our Zingo board, maybe we're cutting a piece of putty and putting it on the board. If we're working on managing containers in a lunchbox so we can go to school and eat lunch independently, we can take toys with small pieces and hide them in the containers. You know, if a child's working on dressing, maybe we can put a shirt on as a smock for a craft and work on, you know, some of those like hemi-adaptive techniques, or, you know, use dress up as to work on some of those fasteners. If a kiddo is working on toileting, you can see in this top right picture, we can kind of substitute shaving cream and work on, you know, that combination of rotating, reaching behind, thoroughly wiping. But it's a little bit more fun and engaging. So whatever your child's form of play is, we're just kind of trying to weave these skills into those activities and make it a little bit more thrilling. I know we're tight on time, so I'm probably going to skip through these because I think Anna talked about them a little bit as well. But again, I have my email address here if you guys have any questions, and as well as Boston Ability Center's phone number and website. You can also check us out on Instagram. We try and post a lot of ideas for engaging in play and some fun activities like recipes and stuff like that. And if you guys have any questions, I think we'll go into that pretty soon.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie and Anna. Those were great. We have some questions. The first one, let's see. Jennifer, are you there to ask about walking?
Hi, yes. So my daughter is, she has some left-sided weakness. And so I was wondering from the first part of the presentation, if like walking, she does use AFOs, but now has since graduated. And so she's always had something on her feet. And so I'm wondering, does walking without anything such as like socks, so we have hardwood floors, does walking on just the bare floor help in any kind of way? Is that something I should consider, like going outside, walking in the grass without anything on her feet? Does that help in any kind of way for like stability?
Yes, yes, it does help. Getting your kid outside of their socks and shoes and braces, they'll love you for it because usually they don't like being in those hot braces. But it does really help to be on different surfaces, whether it be just the hardwood floor or going outside on the grass or sand even. It does work your muscles in a different way and challenges your ankle stabilizers and your foot stabilizers to work a little bit more. So yes, I would definitely recommend it.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more there, it's really good for the brain because you're not able to predict always what the surface is like, especially if it's a more natural environment. And so then you have to adapt and use your hands maybe to bear crawl or other things. So it's a little bit more predictable and you might get thrown off balance, which then actually helps you re-find balance. So that's just another perspective. I'm gonna read Karen's question because she had to leave. So she's actually referring to virtual therapies, things like CIMT, dynamic movement therapy, using a vibration plate. If you live in a more rural area away from a major city, how can you access these things, or can you access these things virtually? How effective are they? And can the evaluations be done virtually? Do either of you want to comment on that?
I can target pieces of that. So one thing to keep in mind, we do have to think about like licensing laws, unfortunately, across state lines. So that's one thing to think about in terms of, I know you asked, our therapists able to provide telehealth out of state. We do find telehealth, I can't speak to constraint therapy over telehealth per se, but in general, from an OT perspective, I think telehealth has been a great opportunity to see what families have in their own home, so that, you know, families are showing you a toy that their child's interested in, and we're just kind of giving suggestions on how to use that toy, which could be during constraint or not. And then also kind of seeing what the setup is. So if something, you know, if a child's sitting at a table and something's difficult, are there ways that we can, you know, build up some support for their feet or their torso, so that they can engage in play, and focus on some other skills. So I guess that's not specific to constraint, but I do think in general that there have been some real benefits to telehealth, because we have toys and games in the clinic that are great to practice things, but ultimately that's only, 45 minutes, an hour a week. So we really want to see kind of what things families have and problem solve with them. Not just giving our ideas, but also kind of, working together to see what might work. I think there were other portions to that question. I'm forgetting what the other portions were, but.
So, well, just one comment that I put in the chat. So there is actually, out of Ohio State University, there's a current trial for constraint induced movement therapy that's virtual. I can't remember the exact age range. It may be 5 to 8, something like that. And if anyone on the call wants information, please get in touch with me, and I can put you in touch with the clinicians and researchers who are conducting that. So whenever there's a clinical trial, it's with the goal of demonstrating or evaluating efficacy. So is it possible to do that? Anna, did you have anything to add to Karen's questions?
Nothing to add to that one.
Okay. All right. So Jordan, are you able to ask your questions?
Yep. Can you guys see me? Hi. Sorry, I'm making lunch for my daughter who has a non-COVID cold. It's like the masks came off in school and we got all the colds. So which order did you want me to ask it in, Mara? Do you not care?
Whatever makes sense to you, because I'm managing the chat, so I don't know what order.
Okay, sure. So one question is, I heard like the advice is, hey, when your kid expresses an interest in something, run with it and work it into therapy. But I'm really afraid, because I have killed many an interest from therapizing it, how you guys walk that line, or any recommendations you have. That's my first out of 3 questions.
Great question. I think knowing yourself, and if you are therapizing everything, just try to be aware of that when you're approaching these activities. But I would say just try to take breaks from always doing therapy and let them do things separately. So even though they may lead you with an activity that they're like, hey, I'm really interested in this toy, and you start doing activities based on that toy, then give them some time for like free play and just let them do something on their own. Because if you're always hovering and always being like, ooh, can we kneel while we do that? I think they'll get a little bit sick and be like, please, mom, go away.
You know, it's so tough, because on the one hand, I feel like consistency is key. It's like habitualizing. No, you always do the right hand faucet with the right, and like building that up. On the other hand, consistency is also a killer. So I guess, but I think that's really good advice. Sometimes letting them do it their own way and exploring it. Mackenzie, did you want to jump in, or should I ask my second question?
I guess also just kind of letting them come, when we say like letting running with a child's interest, especially as kids get older. You know, looking at what's motivating to them that is also using two hands. So we might think of typical two-handed tasks that to them don't have a lot of meaning. So I think when something becomes something that they're really interested in doing is when they'll have that motivation to work through the challenge involved in it. So if that's bike riding, or if that's you know, typing, or you know, different things, like if it's being able to cut their food so they can go to a restaurant with friends, or you know, brush their own teeth when they go to a sleepover, kind of waiting it for it to be something that's motivating to them, so we're not deterring them from it too early on.
Right. That's true. Yeah, if they show an interest. So that leads me, it's a good segue to the second question. In how can you describe like a typical, not that there's really typical trajectory of how PT and OT evolves as the kid grows up? You know, I have a first grader right now. Is it more episodic? Is it more goal driven by themselves? Like what might it look like in the later elementary years, middle school years, high school years?
So I have been practicing myself for 4 years, so I haven't had like a lifelong following of a kid. However, I know my professors in school did follow kids from basically birth until they were, they were adults at the time that they would meet us as a class. And with those treatments, I know that they would periodically do check-ins based on things that would come up in their life. And whether that be, sometimes I'll recommend with my patients, hey, they're doing so well right now, how about we decrease our frequency to once a month, or maybe let's check in once a year, or maybe let's just check in if you need me, or something comes up that they're having difficulty with. But I think it's a little bit, obviously it's child dependent, child specific, but checking in as they need. And as their activities grow, obviously, when you get older, you're involved in more outside of therapy, some group activities, sports, stuff like that. So you want to balance that, and therapists, us medical professionals, will understand and try to accommodate for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the piece you said about like episodic is great too, because we don't want kids to get burnt out after, you know, doing these things every week for a long time. So I think sometimes early on, there's a lot of kind of like foundational skills that we're working on, especially if we're thinking about, you know, upper extremity use. We're thinking about, you know, kind of all those movements that I went through, and building each of those. And then once you have those foundational skills, it later on can become, how do we translate those to specific activities? And that's kind of where, you know, those check-ins become important, because things that are going to be important and challenging for a child 5 years from now are not relevant now. So, you know, having those check-ins to say what new things have come up that your child wants to be able to do, and how can we kind of problem solve through it, even though maybe we've already worked on building those foundational skills and you have ideas for how to continue those skills at home. Maybe we're problem solving through a specific activity.
Okay. So again, this third question, the last question, may
Wait,
not.
Jordan, wait a second, because Maddie wants to jump in.
Go ahead.
Jordan, hi everyone. I loved your question, Jordan, and it's really, I think it's a great question, particularly the part about, you know, therapizing and how to sort of go with an interest without sort of extinguishing it. And when I think about this topic, for me, there's certain kind of qualities that are central to play, to the attitude of play, that are different from the therapizing sort of mentality. So one is like curiosity and reciprocity, right? And another I think is important is having a flexible attitude about the goals, or what you're trying to get out of it. Because I think when we're in a therapeutic or trying to fix something mind state, it's like you get fixed on a certain idea of what needs to happen. And that is, I think, fundamentally different from the relational kind of quality of play. So those are just my thoughts.
Curiosity. Yeah. No, that's a really
sorry, can No, I was just gonna jump in. Oh, sorry, you can't see me. I also find, I'm Amy. I have a 6-year-old. I'm also an OT. I work with a geriatric population, so this is not my area. But I also find there are certain things I just don't touch for therapy-related activities. Like there are a few activities that are just really core to like my son's enjoyment and happiness, and I just leave them alone and I let that be play. And I don't try to therapize it. And if he does it, it's great, but it allows him to have something that is just for him, that makes him feel good, and that can be whatever he wants it to be. And I find that really empowering for him. Yeah, some things are just not stressful. They're just fun, and that's okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. And then, so my third and last question, again, continuing this trajectory, thinking many, many decades ahead, like for our kids who had perinatal stroke, like might they need PT and OT for the rest of their lives? Like after school, like in college, as adults, like I'm like now middle-aged, and like when there's something that hurts, I'm like, is it like a thing that's serious, or am I just middle-aged and like just everything's gonna hurt? And like what does that might look like as they age too?
So I actually want to answer this from the perspective of Nikita, who was on our session last week, who's in his early 30s. And I have permission to talk about this, but he recently started up with PT, OT, and speech after not having done them for more than a decade. And his motivation is, I'm in this aging body, and often aging comes sooner when there's an underlying disability. And I'm in this aging body, and I want to work toward my fitness goals, my longevity goals, my functional goals, and what are the options. So, so it was like completely different, and also obviously directed by him because he's now an adult with access to different resources than when he was a child.
And is he like in his 30s now? That was a
He's
great
in his
webinar, by
early
the way.
30s,
Yeah.
and he was able to access outpatient therapy at Spalding Rehab Hospital, and now he's moving to another city, and he knows what to look for. He knows what worked for him because he tried a variety of things, and like rowing is something that can be adapted to work for him for fitness. So now he needs to look for an adaptive rowing situation when he moves. So that's just one example.
Thank you, Ma.
Karen, I saw you came back on. We took a stab at answering your questions, so we can share those on the recording, but if you're able to come on and ask any aspect of it that you want to focus on, we could try again with you here.
Oh, sure. Here, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Sorry, wait, I'm not gonna turn the video on just because I'm actually at a therapy appointment.
That's fine.
So, you know, I think I was just wondering, like, there's like, I feel like, you know, on different support, you know, parent groups, there's, you know, there's all these therapies that people say like really helped their child. And, you know, sometimes you just don't have access to that. Like I do have friends who are, you know, they live maybe like 3 hours from Boston, and, you know, they would really love to do a Constraint program, but, and I just wasn't sure, like, you know, like telehealth, like what are the, I do feel like there's great things that happen with telehealth. I just wasn't sure of what the restraints are too, like what parameters does telehealth work really well in? Like, could someone do a fully virtual Constraint program? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
or like,
so I had put in the chat that there's actually a clinical trial from the same people who are running the I Acquire trial. They're doing a clinical trial on the effectiveness of virtual constraint-induced movement therapy. So I can share that with you after the talk, and you can share it with any families you know. It's a certain age range, which I can't exactly remember. And that somehow for that, I think maybe because it's a clinical trial, they don't necessarily have the same geographic constraints that typical licensing requires for PTs and OTs.
No, that's great. No, thank you. That's helpful.
I also, in my role as a Feldenkrais practitioner and parent coach, have done a fair amount of coaching about how to do modified constraint-induced movement therapy in a home setting. And that's something I did for my own child from 12 months to 2.5 years. And it for me at that time, we used an outpatient model, which actually would work even if you were, say, 3 hours from Boston. And it was meeting with an OT once every 3 months to get new ideas. But in between, it was a home-based program. And I designed the program, but I got input from OT and from physiatry at different times. And for us, it was, sort of 3 hours a day on the usual days, and then all day on weekends and vacations, and for 1.5 years. And so that was like what I decided to do, and it worked very well in my situation for my child. But I don't recommend exactly that for other families. I adapt it based on, again, their child's abilities, the family's situation, all of the full picture.
No, that's helpful. No, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Looks like we're getting some more questions. Let's see. Tana, I'll paste the previous recordings. They're all on YouTube, and I'm gonna get that channel. Actually, that channel will be in the follow-up email. So I'm gonna send a survey as part of the follow-up email, and I'll really invite all of you to respond to the survey, because it's the only way that we know how we're doing in terms of providing educational content that's useful to you, and also what you'd like to see next year. Our season runs from about September to May, and we offer 9 or 10 educational events, and we'd like to plan the next season this summer. And we already know that one topic that we're going to focus on is PTSD and how trauma influences these children, the parents, and the whole family system. So that's one topic that we've heard interest in, and we already have potential speakers lined up for, but we'd like to hear of speakers that you know of, as well as topics that you'd like to hear. And then just if any of you are interested in coming next Saturday, we're super excited for this in-person outdoor event to allow an opportunity to reconnect. So I think we'll wrap up here, and I will thank our speakers so much and hope that everyone has a great summer, and look for an email from pdstroke@ygsa.org with the survey, as well as the links to the past YouTube videos. All right, have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you.